Beth Clarkson, who's the evidence officer from Yorkshire Wildlife, Sian Macmillan, evidence manager, I think, at Yorkshire Wildlife. She's going to talk a little bit later. And I'm very pleased to introduce Alison Duffield, who is the new Yorkshire Wildlife Transect coordinator. So if you are one of Yorkshire Wildlife Transect walkers, then it'll be her that will be your first line of contact. Of course, you can always come to me, but she's your first line of contact. On the screen, I hope you can see, I thought this is a very apt picture because it kind of sums up the 2024 season rather well. This poor little Heath fritillary hiding under a leaf from the rain kind of sums up last year pretty well. And I put it as my headline because I've heard this comment so many times from you walkers. So many of you never ever saw a common blue, a brown argus, a small copper, a holly blue, or even a as common small tortoiseshell, either not at all or only very, very late in the year. And that has been a story for many of us. I put on the screen our butterfly of the year, and I'm not going to tell you the species name, but this beautiful picture from Richard Lewington, I really couldn't resist popping on at this point. Gives you a clue. If you'd like to put in the chat box, have you seen your first butterfly? If so, what species was it? I think quite a few of you will have seen them because we've had some cracking good weather really for March. That first week of March and the last few days have been really good. And I've seen 5 or 6, including comma, peacock and brimstones. So please, can you put in what was the first butterfly you've seen this year, if indeed you've seen one? And please, can you also let us know, which species are you having the most difficulty identifying during the season? Because at the end of this, we'll look at your answers and Beth will decide whether we need to run through any of the species identification just to try and help anything you're having difficulty with. But this meeting is for you. We want to hear any difficulties you're having, anything about your site that you're worrying about. You've got Yorkshire Wildlife here, so you've got the people who really matter are in the room. Please put your answers in the chat box. So at the moment, we're just doing the introductions, and then we're going to do butterfly headlines like we normally do, news article, topical things going on. And we're very lucky tonight to have Sian, who is the author of the Yorkshire State of Nature report. She's going to give us the lowdown on that document, which is a seminal document about the state of nature in Yorkshire. So we're very lucky. I'm going to just talk about how we gather this data and what we do with it. And we're going to have a look at how well we've done as in our Transect walking in 2024. Then we come on to the meat of the session, which is a review of the 2024 season. How bad was it? What species did worse and where did it happen? And for the first time, I'm going to take a long-term view of each of our species. It's going to be a real whistle-stop tour. There's a lot of ground to cover, but for the first time, I think we're in a position now, we've got so much data from all of you walkers that we can actually give you a full long-term overview of our species. And traditionally, we also like to introduce all our new walkers who started in 2024, had their first year of Transect walking, and we'll read out their Transect names. If they wish to speak to us for a couple of sentences, if you could, or you new walkers, about their site, you'll be most welcome. And we get to know you a bit, which is the whole purpose of this evening. We then ask for your feedback and any issues affecting your site. We're open to question, and we also will share some identification tips with you. For those species that you've mentioned. So, in the headlines, I guess the one that's stuck in a lot of people's heads is it's supposed to be a butterfly emergency. Well, I'm hoping this presentation tonight will answer that question for you. So let's just get into the headlines. What actually hit the headlines? This was BBC News in around about August time. Yorkshire Wildlife very kindly asked me to write an article for their blog about what was going on in Yorkshire with butterfly numbers. Everybody was noticing how far they were down, and BBC, being on the ball, picked it up, and they interviewed me for an article on there for their website. And I was also invited on to broadcast on Radio Yorkshire, so the global one that covers all different radios throughout Yorkshire, the gardening program, to just give a rundown what was happening. And yes, the figures then were quite frightening, at least until the end of July, when I did this analysis. And yeah, 3/4 of our species that time were down more than 2/3, and a third were down over 90%. It was quite shocking what was going on, particularly as you entered into the month of July. It was really very poor. And subsequently, big butterfly count happened at the end of July. Although it's not very good science, I have to say, big butterfly is poor science because it's a 3-week slot, which is fixed. But of course, if the season is late or the season is early, you get more or less butterflies. So you can't compare one with another, which I think you need to bear in mind when they talk about these statistics. It's not like the figures that we create, which are taken on an annual basis. But it was very significant. They were down 42% in average, and it was the lowest count they ever had since the count started back in 2010. Looking wider, thinking about this evening, I just wondered how you felt about what was happening in the world out there, because so much is happening right now, and most of it is quite frightening. And I just thought I'd just put a few things together on this, on the global tensions and what's happening, because it has caused chaos with countries' economies, and people are beginning to question: should we be spending the money that we are spending on environment? Should it be going to other places? With falling living standards, and particularly now, squeezing on charities funding. I know butterfly conservation has been forced to make some cuts, and I think the government is about to announce within the next day or so similar cuts to Natural England and DEFRA. And of course, hot on the press, I suppose, is the budget and how it is hitting farmers. And we have to be honest, farmers control an awful lot of land, and therefore an awful lot of our countryside is dependent on family farms in particular. And probably even worse than that, the Elm scheme, which is the replacement for the old fixed payment system, which has been in place for many years, which just paid farmers for owning land. The Elm scheme came in, and around about 50% of the UK farming area has taken it up. And this is the government pays for what they call public goods, i.e., like restoring wildlife. And they were wanting the farmers to deliver this using public funding through what they called the Sustainable Farming Initiative. Unfortunately, that's been put on hold. Hopefully, we'll get unheld shortly as the government settles in. But in the meantime, of course, farmers are really worried that this is a very significant part of their income. In farming, income, what they get from government is quite often equal to farm incomes. So it's highly significant. And then, of course, you've got the land planning reform, which means that it will give permission for greenbelt to be used for developing houses, etc. And you might have noticed, certainly I've noticed, so many letters coming through my door about solar farms being built in our local area. I think that half the Vale of York seems to be under some kind of threat of having either batteries or solar farms built. Certainly all around where I live here in the Vale of York seems to be destined to be a giant solar farm. And of course, you can't leave anything out without mentioning Mr. Musk, because he gets into everywhere. And of course, AI, which I know astounds us and threatens us at the same time. He had to have a comment, which was a comment about AI and butterflies was, with the right DNA mods, we can literally turn into butterflies. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Musk, for your thoughts on that. Yes. So my advice is worrying, but we know counting butterflies, doing the job that we do, is one of the most, I find, certainly, one of the most relaxing, satisfying jobs that you can do. So my advice is keep calm and carry on counting butterflies. And this year's a special year because it's the 50 years of the UK BMS scheme. So it's been running since 1975, and we've got plenty to celebrate, I think, in Yorkshire. We've had some of our transects have been running for more than 25 years, and I think that's well worth celebrations. So I've asked Yorkshire Wildlife if they've got any ideas, but I'm asking you here, have you any ideas on something we could do to celebrate 50 years of recording? My suggestion is somewhere like Thorpe Marsh, where it's been running since, I think, 2001. And it also, the walker who started it back then is still the current walker. So I think it's well worth celebrating how much commitment some of our walkers give. It's tremendous what you give us. So I'm going to now pass on to Sian.
Thank you very much, Nick. And hello, everyone. It's really fantastic to be able to join the call tonight. And I'm always so enthused by the number of people who join this webinar. You know, with 50 people on the call, it's really fantastic. So Nick has just asked me to spend a few minutes just sharing a little bit about our recent State of Yorkshire's Nature publication. This was a document that Nick mentioned, this has been a huge partnership. Our data and evidence team in our Nature Recovery Directorate has worked very hard on this, along with other members of the Trust, and also a lot of other organisations have contributed towards this, including Butterfly Conservation, for which we're really, really grateful, and which we could not have undertaken this work. So our State of Yorkshire's Nature report was published last year. I've just included the link there if anybody is interested in having a look at that. So this report actually set out to understand the state of nature across Yorkshire. In terms of the species, we focused on 4 key groups. That was the birds, the plants, the Lepidoptera, being the butterflies and the moths, and the mammals. And the reason around this was because they tended to have the better data sets. And this is a really interesting point around tonight, in that how important data is for us to be able to understand what's happening with our baseline, and therefore to understand what direction we need to travel to bring about nature's recovery. So this document helped us, and we've got a little snapshot here to understand the baseline for Yorkshire nationally. And you can see some important statistics here, and how important Yorkshire is, in fact. We host more than 2/3 of British non-microbial species, and that's somewhere between 45,000 and 50,000 species, which is quite remarkable. A number of those species are what we call Yorkshire species of concern. And we have a number of stronghold species, which are species for which their national range has a very large proportion here in Yorkshire. So Yorkshire is very important to them. And of course, we have these amazing species because we have a whole range of diverse and very special habitats across Yorkshire, right from the coast right to the uplands. So within the document, we have a whole section dedicated to the butterflies and moths. And if you're interested in some of the data analysis and the number crunching that we did in the background, we've also published all of our technical reports in a special edition of YNU's The Naturalist. So you can also have a look at a copy of that on the same website. So whilst we know that Yorkshire has some amazing wildlife, what the document actually also highlighted was the fact that a lot of it is under threat. Nearly 2,000 species may have disappeared from Yorkshire over the last couple of hundred years. And we estimated that around 3,000 more species were still at risk. But what we wanted to do was understand the baseline from where we're starting, but then we also used all of that species information to understand which habitats and areas were particularly important to help recover Yorkshire's nature. And the idea being that if we were to focus some of our attention, we could have the biggest bang for our buck. And there were lots of different areas that we've identified within the document. So it's not only important for us to understand where we're starting from and that there are declines, but we also hope that the document acts as a message of hope and can help to guide and inform the management and the nature recovery interventions that we need. But also, we can use that data to monitor and measure our progress going forward. We have big ambitions to achieve 30 by 30, which is 30% of positively managed land nationally by 2030, so we can measure how we're going along that trajectory. This is actually where all of the recorders around Yorkshire become really important. We couldn't undertake this type of work without all of that data. And we want to sort of send out a big thank you and use tonight as an opportunity to show out how grateful we are for all of the work that everybody is doing across all those taxa, but in particular to our butterfly transect walkers who are out there contributing all of this data. We're very, very grateful. I just wanted to also mention again, Alison is now on board working as our volunteer butterfly transect coordinator. If you have any questions about any of your transects, please do reach out to her. She's here to help. Alison, you might want to give a bit of a wave. I don't know if you would like to introduce yourself, if you wanted to unmute and just say hi.
Hi, yes, certainly. It's a pleasure to be here, to have the opportunity to join this meeting. So yeah, as Sam said, I've recently had the pleasure in joining Yorkshire Wildlife Trust as a volunteer butterfly survey coordinator. It's a little bit of background on myself is I actually come from a people and project management background, but I do have a very general sort of broad interest in wildlife and conservation, which stemming from my education in animal and plant sciences. So it's great to be able to get involved in butterfly conservation. So sort of some background on my role and what it involves is firstly, just making sure we have everything in place and organised ahead of the butterfly season. So this includes confirming existing volunteers for Yorkshire Wildlife Trust are still available and happy to continue the great support that they've been giving to us over previous years, make sure we have enough walks conducted at each of our reserves. So also identifying any reserves where we perhaps need some additional volunteers. So following on from this, we have identified some reserves as well. So we've been able to put an advert out to try and hopefully recruit some more volunteers as well. So going forward, yeah, I'm very happy to be the point of contact for Yorkshire Wildlife Trust volunteers. So if anything does change and if any of you are no longer able to continue or you feel you need any additional support with any additional volunteers to help out, do drop me an email, let me know. I'll be happy to help make any arrangements for that as well. I can also assist with rota creating if needed as well. So if so, feel free to reach out. Once you get going with all your data as well, if there's anybody who's maybe not as confident in entering it online or needs any assistance with that, then feel free to contact me. You can send across your forms. I'm happy to help in that aspect as well. The next step this week, I'll be sending you out your risk assessments for your sites as well. But also just to mention, if you do come across any issues whilst walking your transect, of course, let me know, drop me an email. I'll be happy to help, find people who can help if I don't know the answer. So yeah, anything you need at all, I'm very happy to help and always welcome to hear from you. So yeah, that was my introduction. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. It's great to have you on the team.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alison.
So that was a very, very quick tour of our State of Yorkshire's nature work. If anyone has any questions separately, you're welcome to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer any detailed questions about that. Thanks, Nick.
So it's traditional. We look what happens to our data. I know you've seen, a lot of you would probably seen this before, but this is very much aimed at new people. What happens to our data? Why is it so important? The first question, I guess, is what do we want to know from the work we do? Because transects is a very labor-consuming process, walking every week. It's a system that's been developed over a long time that works extremely well. Is now the world standard for measuring abundance, number of insects on a particular site, a measurement of that. That's specifically what we're aiming to do. And that's why the process is quite rigid as regards walking temperatures and conditions. So we make this assessment for each of our species on each of our sites. And of course, there's other things beside abundance that we need to know, and that's also occurrence. So the two things together give us the strongest indication as to how well a species is doing. So occurrence is how many squares, or how many 10-kilometer squares, how many 1-kilometer squares is a species occurring in, rather than abundance, which is where it occurs, how many do we see? Now, there's a massive difference between the two. One, occurrence, you can just do that by just, if you see an insect, you put it on iRecord, that becomes a casual record. While transects are aimed at measuring abundance, which is a systematic process which stands up to scientific rigor. That is the difference. And that requires what they call the pollard walk. So this is, and you all be familiar, is we are walking within a 5 meter by 5 meter by 5 meter tall box, and we count every single butterfly or moth that enters that box. And the conditions we do it in, it has to be at least 13 degrees centigrade, and it does have to be sunny at least for more than half the time. And those are the two crucial criteria that make our data reproducible, in other words, scientific. Now, having walked behind other walkers, so we've actually duplicated, normally by mistake. So I've walked half an hour after somebody else, and we actually sat down and compared figures. I was shocked to find that I was only one butterfly different from the person who walked in front of me. It just shows you how precise the pollard walk can be. And that's really reassuring that the data that we're producing is of the highest quality. And certainly worldwide, our data is used by scientists to study climate change, ecology, and everything to do with butterflies and the habitats they live in, because it stands up to scientific rigor. Now, this data comes from a huge variety of transects. Some of them could be back gardens, some of them could be parks, a lot of them are nature reserves. In fact, I would say probably the majority of them are nature reserves. Sometimes they're just walks that people take. And we do have pretty good national coverage now. So there are 2,000 UK BMS transects. That's one that's walked every week from April to September. But there's also what they call the wider countryside scheme. There's 3,000 of those, and they're 1 kilometre square, randomly chosen, using the bird squares, the BTO squares. So bird recorders during the summer, when there's not a lot of birds around, record butterflies. This works great because it gives them something to do and gives us a huge amount more data. Of course, we have our own squares, but they're separate. This is how it looks like on the UK map. The red dots are the UK BMS transects, and the blue dots are the wider countryside scheme. It's not, the blue dots are not quite random because a lot more people want to record butterflies in the south of England, because I guess maybe they're more affluent and they have maybe more time to spare, and of course the population is higher compared with Yorkshire. And you can see here we're still getting pretty good coverage, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail when we get to that, how we did. But we are getting better, and all this data goes into various national documents. And the key one, which is published annually, is the UK Biodiversity Indicators, which is used by government to really plot the 25-year plan, which is came in as the Lawson report, which said we must stop the decline in nature. And he set a target that we must stop it and improve it within 25 years. Well, we're already well into that 25 years, if not coming on nearly halfway. We have not stopped the decline. We've had a little bit of an effect, but there's a long way to go. Every 5 years, we also publish the state of UK's butterflies. Obviously, with the pandemic, we missed a year, so this was a year late, but that at least takes us up to the pandemic. And also the government publishes a 5-yearly state of nature, which is very similar to the Yorkshire Wildlife Report, in giving a baseline for different species and how well they're doing. So how well are we doing? Well, I'm pleased to report that our transect numbers are going up. We had 116 transects we walked this year, and 91 of them were full transects, of which around about 76 we managed to get decent indices. And indices means a whole year result for a species. And 18 of those were new or restarted, and we lost 5. It's pretty good. This is how we're progressing year on year. So it's not so very many years ago that we were down at 40 or so transects back in 2015, 2016, thereabouts. But we've really managed to push that up, and rightfully so, because you saw the map, how much it was dominated by the home counties and the south of England. Although Yorkshire is very lightly populated, and there's huge areas of agricultural prairie land, which may not warrant a huge amount of surveying. But it's not true that the south has all the good butterfly habitat. It's not true at all, because they've come north, and we're going to talk about that a bit more in a minute. So at the moment we have something like 240 of you volunteers, of whom we're very, very grateful. Another 60 of you joined this last year. You contribute something like 1,700 transect walks this last year. You've walked 4,000 kilometers, which is around something like 3,000 hours of work. That's an amazing achievement. And I think I told you last year that the target that we set is for each of the different landscapes in Yorkshire. We were trying to get a good average for each landscape, we needed 7 sites. We're making very good progress towards that. Now, last year, it was an extremely difficult year, as you don't need me to tell you, which made walking your walk regularly very difficult because of the weather. But still, most of our transect managed to produce indices. In other words, there was sufficient data to be able to calculate how it's done that year for each of the species. This is how we've done. This is the regularity of walking. So this is the number of walks here. The green means that we walk 20 walks in the year. The orange, 15 walks. Now, normally with orange, 15 walks, you can still get a full set of indices, providing there isn't more than a 2-week gap in the middle of July, for example, which is peak butterfly season. And red is not so good, so it's less than 15 walks. We can still occasionally, if June and July are well covered, we can still get indices from red, but of course the quality is reduced. It will not be anywhere near as accurate. You can see what happened in 2024. Our regularity really went down a bit. The reason is it was just difficult to walk. Well, April, it was nearly impossible to walk because of the weather. I know I managed to walk just once in April, but even July and almost whole of June, particularly the beginning of June, was grim. And the sun would come out and you'd try and get to site. And of course, by the time you got there, the clouds had come over and it was just, you gave up. It was incredibly difficult. I'll come on to the weather in a little bit. Just to give you a taste of what we do and what we actually record, this little pie chart actually shows the complete picture of everything we recorded by species. So it's here as a percent. So the wheel starts at small skipper, and you see here, goes around large skipper, and then the whites, the brimstone, large white, green vein white, orange tip, and northern brown argus and brown argus, and that's the blues. The hair streaks are just in here, and then you've got the venessids, the red admiral, the peacock, the comma, tortoiseshell doesn't even show, tells you something. But from this point here, in other words, 2/3 of the pie is the browns, which go all the way around to here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 species of the browns really do dominate numerically what we record. And of course, these are largely on the wing in July in particular. So July is particularly important. Again, I can only thank all of your effort for the year. It was an incredibly difficult year. It's certainly the most difficult year I've faced. And I think a lot of you struggled, and the data suggests it was very difficult. But you managed, and I'm really pleased we managed to get as much data out. And going on to our landscapes, which I mentioned. So this is all our transects here. The coloured areas are the different Natural England landscape character areas. So, for example, here's the Holderness, here's the Wolds, here's the Rydale, and the Tabular Hills and the North York Moors, and Cleveland Hills, Vale of Mowbray, Vale of York, the Humber Head, the Limestone Ridge, the Fringe, the Pennine Fringe, and then you've got the Craven limestones, which includes Ingleborough, which is this lump here. You begin to see where the butterflies occur and where we've got our transects located. Now this is all color coded, so you see here in the key, red is for heath and orange is for lowland heath or woodland, Purple is brownfield, dark green is neutral grasslands, and the bright green ones are calcareous grasslands. That's a very valuable habitat that Sian mentioned, along with the wetlands like here, which is Thorn Moors, and Hatfield Moors, which is this area here, which is, we have a lot of transects. That's Ingleborough, Grassington, where the northern brown argus lives. Here is the Tabular Hills on the south side of the North York Moors, which is the home of the Duke of Burgundy, one of our rarest species. Just along here is the home of the pearl-bordered fritillary, which is our rarest species, butterfly species in Yorkshire. So you begin to see in this map that we are achieving a half decent coverage of our landscapes. Certainly a lot of landscapes are now getting 10 sites on. The ones where we're short, well, we've got nothing on the Holderness, which is a glaring hole. We've not really got the Yorkshire Wolds fully covered. Nothing much in Rydale. A bit of a short up in the Swaledale. Wharfdale is well covered because you've got those good habitats, and nothing on the dark peak down here by Sheffield, which is also, they're good habitats, but we don't have any coverage of yet. In the website, you also find a hyperlinked table like you see here, which basically is listed here by landscapes, but also there's a list by alphabetical list. If you tap any of these, it takes you to each report of each of these transects. If you look to the website, you also find for each of your sites, this is actually from Hornby Hill, you'll find a report which is based on your data over the years. And here you'll see basically a summary, the yearly summary. And these are the indices. So it's a corrected total number of insects seen. So it includes an estimate for the weeks you might have missed. So it's actually a corrected figure, the 5-year average, and then how does this year compare with the 5-year average? And then over here you see the graphs of each of the species. I've just picked out for each site, I pick out a number of characteristic species for that particular site. Obviously it's Hornby Hill, so it's the Duke of Burgundy, the Wall, and possibly the Small Heath. This is up to date, so you can see the latest. All the sites have been updated, and all your sites now have a report written for them. Also, the county report stands next to it, so that you can compare the whole county, what's happening the whole county wide, against what's happening on your site. So you can actually compare. Because although maybe the numbers drop dramatically on your site, it could well be that they've just dropped dramatically across the whole of Yorkshire, which is certainly the case this year. So it's good to compare what the county sees and what you see, and I write the report on the basis of the difference between the two, so as to act as a guide for Yorkshire wildlife managers in particular. That's who it's really written for, to help them really assess how they're doing. This overview, I think people, transect walkers find particularly interesting. Now I know it's rather small, and I've tried to pack into this 60 sites, but don't worry about if you can't read it, because there's one overriding message which is purely color, is the orange squares, and you've got the sites across the top here and the species down the side. If that site is the top for a particular species, then it has an orange square. And really the take home, and if they're the two runners up, then they get a green square. So the message from this picture is almost all our sites are good at something. So it's in alphabetical order. If you're trying to find your site, you've got A this end, M in the middle here, and the W's up here. So you might have to turn your head sideways to read them all. And the species are in the normal list, small skipper at the beginning and small heath at the bottom, the traditional listing. So what can you say? Well, who's the real winners? There are some sites that really stand out as very good, although it changes from year to year. This is the current view. This site here stands out as one of our particularly good sites. You can see it's got 4 orange squares and 4 green squares, so it's pretty high up, and that's Went Hillside, which is a private site right next to Brocadale. Brocadale, by the way, which is one of the best known butterfly sites in Yorkshire, is over here. It might not be topping anything, but it's still got, I think, 7 or 8 second places, as it were, for the species. But there's other really good sites like Hipperley Beck, which is in the heart of the Derby Forest, Forest of Flowers, which traditionally has the highest count of overall highest count of butterflies, 3,000. But this year it got pipped by a newcomer, which is, just go back because I clicked, a newcomer, which is actually St. Aidan's, which is near me here on the Aire, where the river breaks through the limestone ridge. It's an old mining area, which has become an RSPB reserve, St. Aidan's. It's chalky, and the marble white is flourishing along with all the browns, and the browns make up a huge proportion of the total numbers. I thought I would put that out again this year because everybody wants to know how well is my site doing. Well, I can tell you it's quite likely your site will be top at something. So that's really reassuring that we have good coverage of species. With the butterfly of the year, just to reveal, the big reveal, the northern brown argus. Interesting because this is a rare species, but of all the species, this one has made the most dramatic improvement this year. So what did happen in 2024? So globally, 2024 was the hottest year ever. Difficult to believe, isn't it? Because it was also the UK's coolest summer in a decade. The last one being 2016, which was quite a cool summer. And I think that's a clue, but it's also a very cool spring, of course. Butterfly emergency declared, but it wasn't just butterflies, it was also the bees. Bumblebee numbers were down around about 50%. Bats suffered significantly. Many of our birds suffered as well. Almost universally, it was a bad year for nature because one has a knock-on effect on the other. Bees were incredibly slow to breed because they were so busy feeding just to keep them, the queens, just to keep themselves alive rather than have a brood. So it really had quite an effect. It did improve as we got into August. Things began to get a little bit more back to normal. The other big factor, and I think this reflects in the butterfly of the year, is the recovery. Trees in particular, after 2 years of drought, and we've had 2 incredibly dry Junes, and of course 2022 was not only very, very hot, it was also very dry. And trees have suffered quite dramatically, and they made a strong recovery last year. But of course, our driest habitat, the limestone areas, has seen quite a recovery of the sward and the plants on that sward. And I think that's probably why the northern brown argus, which of course only lives on the limestone pavements and very, very dry sites where rock roses, its food plant, can grow. But when you think about it, we've had two cool Julys in a row. Because even in 23, it was a very cool, damp July. So why was 2024 so bad when by all accounts 2023 as a butterfly year was very, very good? Why was it so different? What are the factors that cause this? I can't start without really mentioning history. And if there's one graph that would really tie together all the data about butterflies, this might be the one that really clinches what's going on. So this is temperature, summer temperatures from 1885 when recording began, right till this year. The blue lines are the actual temperatures and the red line is the smooth temperature. And yes, it's been up and down, but we definitely hit some kind of minimum here in the very early 60s. And since then, it's been a kind of steady rise. There's been some lumps beforehand. I think the important thing to mention is up until the Industrial Revolution, in other words, the middle of the 19th century, we had a very similar number of common species present in Yorkshire as we have now. But something dramatic happened in the 1880s. Now, Krakatoa, which was it was a huge explosion in Indonesia of a volcano, gave 2 years of almost no summer. And we know summer are absolutely critical for butterflies. And butterfly numbers and species in particular declined dramatically. And you can see the temperature here when proper recording began reflects the effect of that dust coming out of the atmosphere from Krakatoa and some incredibly bad summers thereafter. It was bad weather as well, but it then quickly recovered. But not all the butterflies came back. And then we had a cooling period for a while, and then a warming period, and then a cooling period. And now, for this since the mid 60s, we've had ever increasing temperatures. The effects on this, on our butterflies, are quite dramatic. So this little chart here just shows by date when species actually began to multiply again. So we did lose some species, but most species just stopped or went down to very low numbers or were only present in the very south area of Yorkshire. Now, Yorkshire is special because it's at the junction, very much at the junction between northern species and southern species. And over the course of that period from the early 70s through till now, that line has slowly moved up through Yorkshire, and now a lot of these species have now reached the northern edge, and some of them actually spread up into Scotland. And you see the list of names here. The most important period is this period here in the 80s. And you see it over here, where species like the brimstone, the gatekeeper, the ringlet returned. The 1990s saw the speckled wood return, the comma, the holly blue returned. The Essex skipper arrived. The brown argus began to multiply. 2018, the silver wash fritillary, which I would never have dreamt in 100 years would ever return to Yorkshire, but it did. And then 2022, the purple emperor returned for the first time in 80 years. So that just sets the picture. The critical temperature where this all seems to happen, and you can see it here, is round about this point, 18.5 degrees, where we switch from species going down to species going up. That seems to be the trigger point. back to reality, 2024. So it was a very unpredictable seesaw weather. It dominated the whole year. It was a very warm winter into a wet, very cool April that I've described. It was very difficult to get out at all in April. Very few sunny days. But then we had actually a relatively warm May. The jet stream slipped south to either below us, dragging in cold east winds, or it was over top of us, bringing that wet, damp Atlantic weather that we're so used to. What that meant was, during the springtime, species were hatching sometimes a week early, and then some other species were going a week late. So it was really seesaw up and down. Going back to 23, June 23 was the hottest ever June on record, and that turned into a really good butterfly year for Yorkshire. The heat seemingly arriving at just the right time, but 2024 was the complete opposite. The weather in June was atrocious, and the reason June is critical is that nearly 2/3 of our species are reaching their final instar, so that they're at their biggest and pupating, ready to fly in July and August. So they're at their most vulnerable. It only takes one caterpillar to be a good meal for a bird. And if you look at the two Met Office stats, I don't know if you've seen these before. So this is the dates along the bottom and the temperatures up the side here. This is the average in the middle, and the red is above and the blue is below. So red is hotter and blue is cooler. And this top line and bottom are the coolest and the hottest periods. And can you see this year, 2024, this is June. You can see it's the complete opposite to last year. It's 9 degrees centigrade difference between these points and these points. Imagine an insect. 9 degrees is absolutely huge. And average temperature in June of 9 degrees centigrade. It's only a little bit warmer than my fridge. The last time we had any conditions like this before was back in 2016. However, we have had worse years. So 2009, it was worse than this. So it's not exceptional. The effects were quite dramatic, and these curves probably show the effects really easily. So this is the flight curve. This year, which is the blue, last year, which is the red. And you can see the difference. 41% difference for the lowland, but if you look at the uplands, it's even worse. It's also shifted. But look at the June dip. Traditionally, with butterflies, we always have a dip in numbers in June. Numbers drop to about, this is transect, this is the actual average count per transect, which is at this period of around about 20. And then, of course, it rises up into the hundreds in the middle of July. But we were getting down to less than 10, while in the uplands it was less than 5. It was very demotivating for you walkers to get such low scores. And the June lull lasted really from the end of May all the way through till nearly the beginning of July. The effect on abundance, well, here's the full effects. This is the species here, and this is the change from the 5-year average. And you can see painted lady, the small tortoiseshell, the holly blue, silverwash fritillary, small copper, dark green fritillary, the red admiral, really were hammered. Round about, well, we're down 41% overall, but we're down 70% on a quarter. We're down 70%, and a half we're down more than a half. So it was our worst year from 2016. The interesting ones which actually did better are the northern brown argus on its sites in the Craven limestones, the green hairstreak, the brimstone, which is having a good run, but also the marble white, which again is a species of chalk which probably reflects chalk habitat. This one will be of interest to you walkers. This is actually gives you a view of how it did on various sites and the difference between sites. And you can see here Warren Percy actually was the only site in this chart which did better. I can tell you also, because the results came in after this, that Gorber and Crookside, which is two Yorkshire wildlife sites on Ingleborough, also did substantially better than the previous year, which reflects again, I think, the recovery in limestone habitats with the wetter weather. But you can also see along here, again, there's quite a bit of limestone at this end and an awful lot of wet grassland at this end. But it's by far from clear. It's not a clear-cut picture at all. You might be able to pick out your site there. Although there's no real pattern, certainly the key negative this year is drier is positive. In other words, those limestone sites seem to do somewhat better. How do we compare? This is interesting little graph which shows how the green line is the abundance by year compared with temperature, and you can see here that generally the abundance, which is the green line, follows the temperature fairly closely. And that's certainly the case with the drop in temperature here last couple of years. You see this year, the figures right down. The next worst year, 2016, which is down here. So it's following the pattern that we've seen over the years. You can also see the temperature rising, as we've already talked about. So it's risen nearly 0.7 degrees in degrees centigrade, and this has resulted in something like abundance increase of 27%. The same is happening with rainfall. It's getting wetter, which you probably noticed. While the rainy days have increased less than the rainfall, the rain is coming down in much bigger amounts, so it's more concentrated. And you will see from this that the best years up here, 2013, 2023 was a really quite good year. 1995 down here, a very good year. And 2003, 2006, worst years. 2016, 2012, and down here, 2009 being the worst year. This little chart, it's a bit, don't be too frightened of it. Just concentrate on this column here. So this shows you long term how things have changed. And you'll see top of the list, Red Admiral, Holly Blue, Brown Argus have really been increasing quite dramatically. These figures are actually presented as a histogram over here. And the green being positive, the red being negative. This is the Yorkshire trend and this is the UK trend. So we follow the UK trend pretty closely. But you can see nearly 3/4 of our species are increasing and only around about 25% are decreasing. And this, as Kshan described in the State of Nature report, this seems to be not uncommon that Yorkshire is actually benefiting because so many species are moving up into Yorkshire, which is not reflected, obviously, in the UK figures, which is why these figures are so much lower. 2023 was a very good year, and it was a good year for the UK as well. And if you look at these are the best years here. And you see the top half here is dominated by 2023. If you then look at the worst years, and we only have figures for, unfortunately for Yorkshire, because the UK ones are not published yet, you'll see that we had 6 species. This was their worst year ever. And that was small skipper, green vein white, common blue, and the small heath, dark green fritillary. silver wash fritillary. It was an incredibly poor year. The fritillary is probably because of the very cool spring. And similarly, common blue, very few people saw them till the till August time, the second brood. Now, I'm not going to cover this in great detail because I know we're short on time, but I'm just going to whiz through it, Beth, if you give me a chance. This just gives you a very quick overview of what's happened to each of our species in the last 20 years. Now, this is you have to hold on to your hats because it's gonna be fast, but I think you'll gain quite a bit from it because it just gives you a complete overview of what's been going on, in particular your work in a very simple graphical form. So small skipper, this year was its worst year ever. It's down overall 67%. It's one of the big losers with climate change, and it's the same throughout the country. Is really suffering. It's not all about a tidier countryside and us cutting down all the long grass, which of course it needs for its eggs. It's just generally declining, and there are some sites, and even Yorkshire wildlife sites, where now numbers are down in the tens, while not so long ago they were up in the hundreds. It really is a big climate change loser, and we should be concerned. Large skipper is very much the opposite. It's actually showing a very small increase. It's up a bit. It loves warmth and damp sites in particular, while the small skipper likes hot, dry summers. Dingy skipper is really responding to climate change. From being in the doldrums, it's definitely taken a turn for the up in the last 10 years. When we have good numbers, it's rapidly increasing and continues to do so. Duke and Burgundy, as I've already described, is declining, but it is slow. More importantly, occupancy, how many sites there are, is dramatically increasing because we're scoring a lot of success with our conservation. And it's congratulations to those people who've helped with the work parties. It's making a huge difference to this species. So the whites, brimstone, well, that is a real success story. It's up 250%. You can see here, not even the cold springs seem to slow it down. It's having a super spring this year. I'm seeing them all over the place. I don't know if you're the same. It's a big winner with climate change. Large white's also improving. You can see it's lost out in some of these in the doldrum periods when the weather was poor. It did lose out, but in general, it's on the way up. Small white is much more pronounced, and I think this is partly changes in farming practice. Farmers are now sowing more cover crops. They tend to be brassica, like rape, etc., which are sown for sheep during the winter. That allows the small white to breed late into the year on the cover crops. Green vein white is really a species which was the most widespread and one of the most common, is really having a very steep decline, and even this year was its worst year ever. It really doesn't like those cold summers. It's down over 40%, and I think the reason is actually because of hot dry summers. The food quality deteriorates, so it's tending to feed on garlic mustard, and the quality, by the time it comes to breed in the middle of summer, the quality of garlic mustard is so poor it's unable to breed. Orange tip, another success story. It's on the up. Long term, it's definitely showing a strong upward. The blues, there's a lot of Sad stories with the blues. Small copper is in decline. It's had its worst year ever. This almost its worst year. Didn't quite beat 2015, and didn't quite beat 2009, but it was a very bad year. Northern brown argus has had ups and downs, but actually this year you can see how dramatic. So this is the effect of the drought here on the limestone pavements and hills. Brown Argus, big climate change winner. It's very different because brown Argus here has a different food plants. It's living down on agricultural land. Its favorite food is dove's foot cranesbill, which actually is lives is an agricultural weed, especially in the spray zone on the edge of fields, is normally where you find it. It's also where you find the brown Argus breeding. Common blue is a worrying decline. It just keeps going down. This year again, it's its worst year ever. That is worrying. I don't know about you, but I walked seemingly miles of bird's foot trefoil, just a sea of bird's foot trefoil, and never saw common blue until the end of August. It was serious. Holly blue is one of our big winners with climate change, but not this year. It's having a correction. You know, it goes through a 6-year cycle with its parasite, and the big peak corresponded with the peak in the parasite, and now we're down to very low. Green hairstreak is holding its own, thank goodness. The Vanessids are a really sad story in this with the weather that we've had. Red Admiral went from top to promptly quite near bottom this year. It's a big climate change winner throughout Europe. In fact, it's become one of Europe's most common species. Tortoiseshell, well, it shows the biggest ups and downs of any of our species. And it is, if you look at long term, it is down. This year is close to our worst ever and comparable with 2009. But this cycle tends to be to do particularly with drought and heat. This species seems to be highly sensitive. If it gets a warm spring followed by a wet summer, for instance, 2020, do you remember when the pandemic started, the weather was so great and then we had a wet summer, the numbers just went astronomical and recovered from quite a low figure. But of course, then we had the drought in 2022, 23, and now we hit the bottom. So it's definitely cyclic with weather strongly. Peacock follows a similar pattern, but not anywhere near as strongly, and it's actually recovering now. Comma, another big success story, particularly recently, with its best year ever last year, followed by a very poor year this last year, but certainly not as bad as 2016 or 2009. Nearly finished. Pearl bordered, small pearl bordered, has had a very checkered time. It's very sensitive to cold springs, and I think that's the story that we see this year. And it is in a long-term decline. It loves warm springs. All the fritillaries seem to need a warm spring to have a good year. The dark green in particular really suffered and reached an all-time low. We lost it from many places this year. So places where it's been established for donkey's years, like Brockerdale, it went extinct this year. In fact, it went extinct along the whole of the limestone ridge until just north of Doncaster, where it hung on. Will it come back to Brockerdale? Well, that's a good question. I hope it will. When it comes back, it seems to come back very strongly. So I'm hopeful that it will repeat the cycle and come back. So that's the dark green. The speckled wood increase seems to be just nothing stops specklewood. It just keeps going up. And the wall, this has shown signs of being one of our most rapid decreasing butterflies. It now is one of our most rapid improving. Obviously, it dipped this year, but in general, it's showing a strong increase. And of course, the browns. Gatekeeper had its best year ever by a long mile last year, and then came back this year. Meadow browns, definitely on the increase. These are, of course, our most numerous butterflies. So when these go up, it makes a big difference to the numbers. Ringlet actually, in many places, went up this last year because it is the effect of the two droughts, and ringlet is sensitive to drought. Worst year 2009. Small Heath, worst year ever, worse than 2009. That is important. And it's difficult to know exactly what's going to happen, but it is quite serious for a species which is now threatened, although it's still moderately common in Yorkshire. It's threatened in the UK too.
The main questions that I've seen in the chat were about whether you'd be able to share the slides after the meeting.
Yeah, that's no problem. So, basics of identification. Any of you people who are totally new to butterflies, just a few of the things that we're looking for when we're doing butterfly IDs. And I suppose we start on this side of the scale. And the ground color is one of the keys. Spots is the next key. Tips and borders, the next key. Bands, in other words, colored bands across the wings. The behavior, really important. The time of year can narrow down your choices quite dramatically with the different flight periods of each of our species. And of course, habitat. And as you're walking, you know, you're going from habitat to habitat, and that has a massive effect on what species you're going to see. Size, of course, is a really good indicator of which species. So you try and add all these factors together to make that identification. So your first question, Beth, I think was the dreaded one, which is the green vein white and the small white. One of the key differences is obviously green vein white, small white, they're very similar in size. And really, there is a difference in flight. Large white flies with some determination, quite often in a dead straight line, while small whites tend to be more fluttery flight. And it has two generations. So it appears April, June, and then it disappears for July and returns later in that month till the end. Usually you find the spots depend on the time of year. So the first generation tends to be very lightly spotted, and the second generation tend to be very dark. And that's true of all our species. But the key characteristic of what you're looking for with whites is this bit here. So the characteristic of a small white is the length of this black line along the top is 3 or 4 times the length of that line here. So it doesn't wrap around the corner, unlike a large white. It stops. And you see the same here. This is the female. Previous one was a male. You see it's got 2 spots. Try and ignore these because they really don't matter. It's this bit here that matters the most. So the male, and you see that black corner really clearly. So check the tips. Now you can't do this for every single butterfly because you see a white and only about half the time, or even less than half the time, you actually get a chance to see it land and actually do a positive identification. But one of the key differences between small white and green vein white is habitat. So green vein white tends to be associated with damp areas, woodland, hedgerows, while small white tends to be more open, grasslands, just about anywhere. And you find that numbers of green vein white, as you move from, say, a grassland into a woodland, the proportion of whites which are green vein increases dramatically. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The other thing about small white is the underside is yellow. But again, you only get a chance to see that if it's actually landed. And let's face it, when you're a transect walker, we don't have the luxury of hanging around to see the colour of undersides when they land. We have to make a judgment on what we see. The green vein white. Well, you can. This is a summer brood, and you see here that it spreads, and each of those veins is dark, and it comes in from the edge. So it's not just that top edge like small white; it spreads much further. In the spring brood, in other words, the ones which are going to be emerging in the next few weeks, this is not so clear, but you can see it. And it's not just that corner, it spreads down the wing. And you also see these dark lines on the veins. This is the female with the 2 spots. The flight is also different from the small white. It tends to be a weaker flight, aimless flight. It doesn't travel very far. It tends to be associated with stays near those damper areas where its food plant grows. Again, it has the 2 generations, so you see them in the April-June period, and then later in the July period. Sometimes a 3rd brood. Later broods have these much stronger markings. They're also very variable in size. If you see something very small, I would always be suspicious that it is a green vein white. So they can be half regular size. Quite surprising how they vary. So you've got the darker tips of broken veins. Of course, the real characteristic is on the underside, which is these green veins. But here you see, this is a male, that was a female. See how variable it is, those markings, but you see it wraps around the corner and comes part way down, and these lines go into the wing, and the veins are very slightly coloured. If you're lucky, of course, you get to see the underside. You see those dark veins, and then you cracked it, but of course, that is not always the case. So in reality, this is a very tricky problem, is telling small whites from green vein whites, when in reality, when it flies past you, it's just another white butterfly. So what do you do? And this is where I use the proportion system. So whenever I get a chance to see a white butterfly land, I want to do identification, a firm identification on that specimen. So I've given you all the information there to do a positive, but of course, maybe you find 50% of them are green vein whites and 50% of them are small whites, would be a typical kind of figure. How you use that is, how I use it is, for every white that goes past you, which you don't know what it is, you must record it. So what I do is 50% of them I put down as small white, 50% of them I put down as green vein white. So it's the proportion method. I don't go much further than that. So I might go to 25%, depending on how many I see. If there's a lot, I get to see more butterflies. I can be more accurate. But I do it by observing butterflies that have landed where I can actually be sure about the identification to calculate my proportion. Now, the important thing to say is that will change. So as soon as you change habitat, so as I move from, say, grassland habitat, mixed habitat, into woodland, that proportion will jump. And usually it will jump to nearly 100% green vein white and quite likely 0% small white. So it's important to double, if you're using the proportion method, that only applies for each section that you walk. So you need to recalibrate. I mean, transect walking is a constant process of learning. And you need to keep recalibrating yourself as you go along and check. I try and check every single landed butterfly. If I get a chance to identify it, definitely it's close enough, then do it to check yourself, because the season changes, how they appear changes, size changes, colouring changes with the seasons, as I've described for each of the broods. So I hope that's useful for that question of green vein whites and small whites. It's not easy. You've got to count every single butterfly that comes into your square, and that's how you cope with it.
Thanks, Nick. We've had a question on the green vein white and your proportion suggestion.
Yeah.
Julia had asked, when recording the whites, when would you use the small green veined option, and when would you expect the proportion method to be used?
I use it from the very first butterfly I see. I think it's important that you double check everything. If you get the chance to see one, double check it. Obviously, you can't do it for every single one. They're moving too quick. You've got to be realistic. You're not allowed to really slow down significantly. Yes, occasionally I will stop and chase one down if I think it's going to land. But I would not get hung up about guesswork. Guesswork is part of what we do. And the proportion system is a tool to make the guess as accurate as we can possibly get it. So I'd say to Julie, use it from day one, and calibrate yourself regularly. There might only be a few small whites to begin with. But yeah, it will depend on your particular transect, what proportion of the two you will get. Is that okay, Julie? Yeah, good. Okay, if I move on then to small and large, I won't bother with orange tip. Here's a quick summary of the whites. It just brings it all together. Useful just to compare. So you got the females and the males. So that's the green vein white. And you can see those lines pulling in from the side there. It's quite characteristic. This is the summer brood, the second brood. This is the male. You see the lines pulling in from the side there. A single spot. Then you've got the large white. Sorry, that's the large white. This is small white. They're very similar, as you can see. But can you see the large white, the black wraps all the way around the corner, and the small white, as I described, just the tip. And there's 3 times as much black along there than there is down here. And of course, there's a size difference as well, but not a very clear size difference between large and small. Sometimes they are surprisingly, a big small white is the same size as a small large white. Again, you get the one spot, which is characteristic of males, 2 spots for females. You don't have any spots on large white males, but you do have this black wrapping around the corner. And then, of course, you have the orange tip female. But the key here is you've got the checkers around the checkered margin and this big, strong black blob near the top edge. And you can see that. You can just about pick it out with the flying butterfly, those black spots. But they fly alongside green vein white in the same habitat. Damp places, of course, and they tend to fly together at the same time. So it's important to check those against green vein white. I hope that's helpful. So skippers, let's do large skipper first. That's a large skipper. And it only has one generation. It usually begins at the end of May. I'm sure they drink jet fuel for breakfast because of all the butterflies. Large skipper has to be one of the fastest of all our butterflies, and they're small enough to almost vanish on you. They are so fast. They, in the beginning part of the flight period, of course, they're on their own, which gives you a chance to see this one in the beginning part of June. Only the large skipper appears, and it is very golden. And the characteristic that you're looking for is this very strong black line on the males, but all of them have these pale spots. And the pale spots are on the backside as well. Tends to prefer wet places, dike bottoms, grassy habitats. It loves it where there are sedges growing in amongst the grass, so in other words, a very damp site. The males perch and ambush, which is, I guess, why they're so fast, is they're looking for anything they can chase. They always rest in this moth-like pose with its forewings tilted upwards. And that's the female. Not quite so bright as the male, but it still has these patches. It's quite often you think, oh, that's a new species. I'm not familiar with that one. And you find that it's the female of something you are familiar with. So just watch for the differences between the sexes. The females tend to be flying later than the males. These are the chaps you will always see first, and these will fly a week or two later. The undersides are green or greenish, but you've still got the spots on the underside. Quite characteristic. And can you see the hook tips on the antenna? They're quite characteristic. There's an antenna tip. Only the large skipper has that point. Your chances of seeing it when it's sat are slim because you have to get up really close to see that. So you go by the spots. So the real tip is, if it has spots, it can only be a large skipper. That's your key. So the small and the Essex. I'm not going to spend long on Essex, but it's important to note that's a very typical small skipper. The male. You know it's a male because its bottom sticks out beyond its the end of the wings. So it's, for almost all species, you can tell boys from girls by just looking at that end. If it sticks out further than the margin, it's invariably a male. And of course, the males have these sex cells, which is the scent that he tries to persuade a female to mate with. So it produces a scent. You can actually detect these scents, by the way, even with our very, very poor sense of smell. Green vein whites smell of lemon, and meadow browns smell like a very old book. You know, a very old book, when you open it, that smell you get, that's the smell of a meadow brown. Of course, they love the tall grassland. The males can be very, very fast, like the large skippers, but there's no spots. They're this uniform color. The males are obviously interested in sitting and intercepting females. Females try and avoid the males, and you can find them kind of jinking, skipping. So they'll just flap their wing between uh, grass blades and move low down in the canopy in between and fly in, weaving in between the blades of grass. It's very characteristic of the skipper. How the skipper gets its name is from its flight. Again, it rests with its wings half open, like a moth. It's uniformly golden. There are no spots. The female doesn't have this, has nothing there, it's just plain. The antennae don't have points, and they don't generally start until you're into July. So you have a month of large skippers where there are, well, nearly 3 weeks of large skippers when there are no small skippers. So you've got a good chance of learning large skippers before the small skippers arrives, and you should notice the difference straight away. So they do overlap for a few weeks, but not much. And the Essex, which looks very, very similar to the small skipper, but they're later still. So they're more mid-July. And how you tell them apart, I'll show you. So that's a small skipper. See the orange antennae tips. And this is Essex. And this is the main difference between them. How you see that is very difficult because you've got to get at the right angle. It's difficult when you're side on to an insect to be able to see that. But if you think you've got Essex, it's well worth having a look. And again, the only way you can really do it is proportion system. So have a look at 2 or 3 insects as you're walking and try make a guess what proportion you have of Essex. At the present, it doesn't go north of the wharf in the middle of the Vale of York. But it is spreading up the valleys, it's spreading up the air, and it's throughout the rest of the Vale of York, south of the wharf. When you look at the males also, that's a typical small skipper with its sex brand there, but the Essex skipper has a very much shorter one. So that's the main difference between those 2 species. I hope that's useful. Beth, have you got any more queries? I'm afraid I don't have the brown Argus one, but I can give you a few pointers if you wish. Shall I do that? I don't have any pretty pictures, unfortunately, to go with it. So I would say the key difference between female common blue and the brown Argus is I always think, because I live in York, chocolate and orange really describes the brown Argus. So the brown of the wings is a uniform chocolatey brown color, and the lunules, that's the orange discs along the outside edge of the wing, are very, very orange, and there are no eyes to those lunules. How the common blue is different is invariably there are some blue scales, and they're not the chocolate brown of a brown Argus. It's much more off brown, still dark, but it's not chocolatey. And the orange is not so orange. And there usually is on the hind wings, the eye spots show in the middle of the lunules. So those are your 3 key identifiers. In terms of when they're flying, I would say common blue. Well, female common blue is just a dull color, while a brown Argus, when flying, is much more a silvery grey because of the brightness of the underside, and it's much smaller generally than the common blue. So I would say probably just 2/3 the size. In other words, if you see something flying really quickly, and it's a silvery color, so it's typically it's going to be one of the blue families with those characteristics. It's most likely, if it's small, it's most likely a brown Argus. If it's larger, less silvery, it's going to be most likely a common blue. I would always try and follow them in flight and wait for them to land, because they do land very regularly. So you've got my permission to stop walking your transect and go and follow it and track it down and just double check that it is what you think it is. And I think you will find, if you do that, you'll learn pretty quickly the difference between the two. Certainly on one of my transects, I have lots of brown Argus and I have lots of common blue. And it is difficult, but I do manage it by, watching for the smaller size, and this silvery color tends to distinguish it from one from the other. I hope that's useful. Any more questions, Beth? We wouldn't have the amount of data or anything like what you've seen tonight without the help of Yorkshire Wildlife. Thank you very much, all three of you here tonight. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
If there's no questions, Beth,
I can't see any more now.
it's 9:30, so I've been going far too long. So it's I think time to say goodbye. I shall stop my share, and